Hi, I'm Chris, an interaction designer on the Android Developer Tools team. This is the fifth and last episode of our mini-series of building Shrine in Jetpack Compose. Today we're going to cover the last big part of the Shrine app, which is building the catalog screen. If you missed the past episodes, be sure to check the show notes for the links. So today we're going to cover building the catalog in the Shrine app. And so, if we go to the Material Web Design website, so this is the page that we're all familiar with through the episodes of Shrine. But in particular, the home screen, the catalog, which we're going to build on the home screen. I kind of use the two terms interchangeably. It's an interesting design. It's actually what Shrine refers to as a weaved image list. So, you've kind of seen these weaved images lists or this design in things like Pinterest. I think there they call it a masonry layout, but here we call it an weaved image list. Here, this is kind of what it looks like on kind of more of a tablet. But if we actually switch back to the design spec, and we're going to kind of build it more for the phone, it looks like this. And so it's a similar thing, just a little smaller, and the spacing is different. But I think you can have a lot of flexibility with this design. There's not a very strict way to build a weaved image list. It's very custom for Shrine, which is one of the interesting parts and why we're building it in this episode, since it's much different from your typical list that looks like vertical or horizontal. So here on the design details, if we, kind of look at the bounding boxes, what we have is you have every other item is 2 or 1, depending. So if it's 2, one kind of leans to the right and the other one leans to the left. And then this line itself ends up being about roughly 2/3 of the width of this screen. So it's a very interesting layout, but we'll have a lot of fun building it. And then the next one will kind of start at that mark as well. And so as you scroll through this list, that's kind of how it ends up looking. This one, we're probably not going to do this, but you could offset it too. So in the very first one, it's the bottom one hangs to the left, the other one hangs to the right. And then for some reason, this third one goes to the left and the right. And so, like I said, there's a lot of fun and flexibility you can build with this. We won't go into all those options, but after we build this, you'll see how you can kind of tweak this to your liking. And kind of going back to what I said, this weaved list is built across different screen sizes. So here, this is more like a portrait tablet mode. Similar layout, like I said, the spacing is just different. But here, yeah, it just differs. Sometimes it leans to the left, sometimes it leans to the right. And then if we were to really build a landscape tablet mode, it would look even more different. But generally, it's roughly the same layout. So that's what we're going to build today. Oh, and then this is a different design, but if you were to... And so the thing about Shrine is that the original designs were meant so that this app could actually scale to all different form factors, so tablet, phone, and desktop. So if we were to build the desktop version of Shrine, this layout would probably move away from the weaved list and more like a masonry layout, which you kind of see in Pinterest. But we won't get to that today, but you can kind of see how this weaved list changes depending on the form factor. So let us get started in that, and we'll jump to Android Studio. Just as a reminder, all this code is on GitHub here, and this will be in the links below in the show notes for this fifth and final episode. And so let's jump into Android Studio. One thing that I wanted to review is just some small changes that I made since the 4th episode, which now seems like quite some time ago, but I thought I'd cover it. And these are just little changes I made in the project, so people aren't surprised. So one thing is, in the 4th episode, I believe we were hooking up the cart animation here, and we didn't actually get to building this button on the bottom, this proceed to checkout button. So I've gone ahead and done that. It's in the project, but essentially the animation is when you open and close the cart, this proceed to checkout kind of pops in, or scales in, which is a cool animation. So that's in there now to start with. And then the other thing is, it's been a while since we've done the 4th episode, and so Compose itself has had various different versions launched since then. And I think the last time we were on the stream, it was at version 1.1.1, and it's now already pretty close to going to 1.3. And so I went ahead and updated those versions in this project. I also updated some of the Gradle versions. This isn't, you don't have to do this. It should still work with the previous versions that are in the project. I just decided to do it just because it's nice to have the newest versions, but the code actually doesn't end up being different. It's just these version numbers. So with that, let's start to build the catalog. And I think going back to the catalog designs, so the first thing we'll do is, it is a list, but really it's a list of cards. So we have to build this card first, and then we'll build a list. So what we'll go to our project, we'll create a new file, I'm going to call it catalog for now. And then this is just like a little code snippet I have for a live template for cards, or sorry, for Compose. Just makes things way easier to get started. We'll build and refresh just so we get our first preview. We can collapse this for now because we don't need it. I'll close some files. That first run takes a bit of time. Okay, so we have our Hello Compose. All right, so now we can start to build the card. I think for the card, there is a card component in Compose, but it doesn't quite meet the needs of what I'm trying to do or what we're trying to do. So I think I'll just build it custom for now. And you'll see why in a second. So I'll start with a column. And actually, I think what I can do is I'll do that so we can kind of look at it side by side. Let me just zoom in. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. Okay. So really this card has an image. It has the logo of the vendor. It has the description of the item, and it has the price. And then there's this add to shopping cart icon in the top left. So we'll kind of scaffold all of that out very quickly. So, we'll have the text, which will be the item description. Then this will be the price. And then we're going to have the image itself. So image. And I actually I think we've had this for a while. We have a data structure called item data. So I can just call it data. And it's going to take item data as the parameter. So actually for description, we can just quickly jump to data.title. And then for the price, we're going to put a $sign for this, and then data.price. The image, so painter resource. So we have the image already. Data.photoresID. Content description. So this will, I guess we can just give it the same title. What else we got? Oh, we got an icon. So the icon, image vector. So this is the add to shopping cart icon. So it's going to be shopping cart. Description will be add to cart. All right, so let's see. And then we have the vendor. So image. And then this we also have in the data structure for item data. So painter resource. But what I actually ended up doing is I built a small little function that helps get the vendor ID. So, the actual image. Yep. And then this will be content description. You can just say logo of, and then this should actually work. All right, and then if you want to see what this does, it's very simple. It just takes which vendor, returns the vector drawable. All right, so we have all of these things, and then it says for our preview, let's just give it, we have the sample items from before. Let's just go with the first one. All right, so let's look at our preview. That was really fast. Okay, so yeah, it's not looking great right now. It doesn't look exactly like the Figma design, but we'll make some adjustments there. So one thing off the bat, so this this icon is sitting on top of the image, and it's about 12. It has 12 dp of padding on the top and the left. So we're going to have to place it over that, and for that, we will use a box. And we'll move these two things in there. Yep, and you can see it's immediately reflected on the right. So for the icon, let's give it a modifier. And we'll say, modifier dot padding, just 12 dp. And that should scooch it right here. Yep, there we go. The vendor actually is slightly over it too, so we also want to put that in the box. But with the alignment, we can actually change it. So we can say modifier dot align, and this would be alignment dot bottom center. And then it's a little offset, and so we can just use the offset. So offset, and then in this case we can say y equals it's 24 dp, I believe. So if we do that, yep. So it's just a little offset there, and that's what we have in our design. For the text, so the text here, it's about 20 dp of padding between the end of the image and the top. These are about 8 between, and then the price, it doesn't say it's 20, but I'm going to give it 20 just because I think it looks better on the card on the bottom. Having it flush kind of seems odd to me. So what we can do is we have our text. So there's many ways you can do this, but I just decided I'm going to use a spacer. So I'm going to put that on the top, and then, you can move this and say this is 8. You can move that, and then this is 20. So let's see how that quickly. Yeah, so it's moving along nicely. So the other thing we'll do is we probably want to center all of this horizontally. So I can do that on the column itself, actually. So I will say horizontal alignment equals alignment dot center horizontally. And boom, there we go. The other thing though is, like, you notice it's kind of got this darker background. And it's actually, we can always add a nice background here just so it's easier to see, because in this theme, I think it's just transparent. Yeah, there we go. So the fonts aren't exactly what is in the spec, if we go back. But we have these type fonts from previously in our theme. So I believe the title is, I think it's a material theme dot typography dot subtitle 2. And then the price is body 2, if I recall correctly. Typography dot body 2. Yeah. Whoa. Okay. So it's rendering the preview. Oh, and the other thing is, this is from our shrine preview, so that's why you don't really see it take effect. So we actually have to make sure we wrap our preview composable with our shrine theme so that the right theming values come in. And then we'll import. Yeah, there we go. See, that looks a lot better. You can tell because it's the Rubik font. Yeah, that looks much closer to the spec. All right. So this is looking good. Now, what do we do? And so I think the other thing I wanted to add is we want this size of this text to take up the same space always consistently. So that's always like 20 dp with padding and then the text. But the image, we want it to kind of stretch as much as possible, because like sometimes the image you get isn't exactly the right size, and it can cause some cropping issues. So, for example, with our preview, we can show you, kind of how things play out if the image is not exactly what you want or isn't cropped to your liking. Yeah. See here, it's like the card, it kind of centers. And so we actually want the image to stretch all the way out. And so I'm going to use a modifier to do that. And I'm going to use the weight modifier. And this should push it. Oh, maybe that was too much. Oh, I think the other thing too is like you should always, this is a general rule, with UI components, always have a modifier parameter. Um, this is useful for if you ever need to modify the child component for some specific reason, like you might be using it in a different context. It's, this gives you the flexibility to ultimately change these things no matter where you use these UI components. And that, oh yeah, so that actually is too much. Maybe I'll take this out for now. But the other thing I will do with the image is I will change the content scale because, like I said, the image is never going to be perfectly cropped. And so content scale, it's nice. There's several values you can use. There's I go here. So there's crop, fill, height, fit. All of these are useful depending on what your context is. Usually for this scenario, you use crop because, like I said, you can't anticipate how well cropped the image is. And so this tries to basically crop it in its frame as best as possible without stretching the image in any way. Versus like if you were to use the other ones, it would stretch in ways that are not ideal. Cool. All right, so then I'll just change this to, I'll remove that actually. Okay. So we have our card. Let me just, so I've done this before. I'm just going to like go back to the code snippet just to like make sure things look okay. Oh, okay. Yes, that's what I wanted to do. Yeah. So I do want to add the modifier to do the weight. And this makes sure that everything is filled. But then the other thing is, the way to fix that is telling the image really to just fill the space as much as possible. Yeah, so here, this is actually what we want because in this case, the modifier is saying that it's like a full phone size. But if we were to say, actually, the card, and this is where the modifier comes in, when you pass it in, you can say, actually, I want this card to be, actually, we can change the width. We can say, let's just make it 280 dp. Yeah, and so it kind of shrinks it. And like I said, you can play around with this, so you could make this actually. But passing in that modifier into catalog card gives you flexibility in terms of how this component should be sized. You can always override it like we have here. All right, so I think that looks good. Just reading through old code. Yep, okay. Oh, maybe width isn't actually the right one to do. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, so in this case, you can kind of see this card is just flexing, but the image is kind of cropped as best as possible. And you can play with image cropping as well to get the ideal look for you. So this is the card. And now we need to actually start on the weaved list. All right. So I will create a preview, and I'm just going to call it catalog preview. Because there's the catalog card, and then there's catalog preview. Or the catalog, and then the cards itself. So for the composable, I'm just going to call it catalog. We're going to reference this in our preview. Catalog. So the catalog, it's a list of items. So one of the parameters is going to be a list of items. So do that. And then, like I said, it's always good practice to have a modifier. passing in just so you can alter it at any time. But in this case, items, we have a whole list of items. So we'll say sample items. But I think the sample items, there's like 30 or so, but we can actually filter it. And so I will just filter it by to say item. Wait, how do I do this again? Item dot t dot category, and we'll just make a. Let's just do accessories. Yeah, we'll filter it. So this is just a sample of what we're going to do, but we're basically saying that we're going to pass the catalog with a sample list of items that are filtered to the accessories items. So within here, what we're going to do is actually we're going to create and I'll try to make this look like a real screen. So we can say surface. And then box, put a box. Okay. So this should show a bigger rectangle down there. Yeah, okay, cool. Don't have anything in there yet, but we will get to that in a second. What we're going to do is we're actually going to use a lazy row or a lazy list. And I don't think we actually covered that in previous lessons or episodes. So if you go to, you can just Google compose, lazy list. And so with lazy lists, basically it's a way to build a list. So you could build a list with a column or row, but the problem is those column and row are not very performant over time because like if you have a lot of items in the list, like 50 or 100, you can't really anticipate how many you have sometimes, then you want that performance of that list as you scroll to be as performant as possible. And so what lazy lists do is they allow you to build these performant lists. And so as you scroll, basically it looks at the list of items that you've passed to this list, and it will render each kind of list item as that thing scrolls into view. It's a very technical way to describe it, but like this is the fundamentals of a lot of the lists that we see in many platforms, outside of Android actually. But for Compose, this is how lists or lazy lists are implemented. So we're going to use a lazy list because sometimes our sample data, like in this case, our sample data is only 30, but like you could imagine if you built a full catalog, a real catalog of like all the clothes in like some company, that could be dozens to hundreds or thousands of items. So you want a lazy list because it can scale to those needs. So, but we are building a weaved list, and the list itself scrolls horizontally. So we're going to use a lazy row. So we'll just type lazy row. Here we go. And then modifier. So the lazy row, it's going to take up all the space because we want it to take the height and width. And then for each item, we'll do this. So we'll import that statement. So this items call basically says how is each item going to be built. And so just to quickly do this, let's just put a catalog card in here, which was our component from before. And so with the catalog card, we can say, oh, the data is IT, which is the next item in the list. And then, yep, so you can see here quickly on the left, or sorry, on the right, it is rendered. And so it's a lazy row. And so as you can kind of scroll it with interactive preview. And so this list, let's see. Yeah, there is a definitive end to here, but yeah. And this isn't exactly what we want. You can kind of see this is extending a little too far. So yeah, and one thing that's nice about preview is like you can hover over it and see the bounding boxes. And in this case, this first card is like way too big. So we can actually fix that. So there's a couple ways to do it. This is where the passing in its own modifier can help. Just for demonstration, we'll just say, every card is 200 dp wide. Yeah. And so now you can see that within the lazy row, it's trying to do that. And back to what I said about image cropping, you don't know how big the card is going to be where it ends up being used. So this content scale.crop is actually useful to kind of get a decent layout for the photo that doesn't stretch or distort in any weird way. So here it's only 200 dp. So what we want to do, if you remember when I first started explaining the weave list, is we have this 2 by 1 by 2 arrangement. I'll get to that in a sec, but for the purposes of this first step, every item in this lazy row is about 2/3 wide of this screen. And so how do we do that? Because sometimes the screen is not always, like in this case, this is a very generic phone frame, which is 360 by 640 dp. This is a very small phone, actually. So like a Pixel or a Samsung phone will be different from this. And so how do we make sure that it's always about 2/3 of the width of the screen? So there's a way to do that in Compose. You can actually always query the screen width within a composable function. So that's through configuration. So you can call this local configuration composition local.current and then just query what is the screen width. And so to that point, we can say, actually, we always want these cards to be 2/3 the width of the screen width. So then we just basically do that with some math. 2/3 is about 0.66 or 667, however accurate you want to be. And so when we make that small change, yeah, so now you can see each card is about 2/3 the size of the screen. So that's kind of the first step. The next step is we want it to kind of be like this 2 and then 1 and then 2. So the thing about lazy row is the way it builds every item, in this case with items, is that it's always going to use whatever code is here to build the next item. And so, how are we going to do it so that it builds one layout on the even index and then another different layout on the odd index? So one thing we first can do is like there's an actual, you can use an items indexed method instead. And so here, item, oh, it doesn't like that. Oh, oops. Did I do that right? One sec. This is faster, just look at the old code. Oh, okay, just missing some parameters. Yeah, so items equals items. And then you need to give it a key. Or you don't have to give it a key, but in this case, I'm going to. Yeah. Okay. And then. There we go. Yeah, if I just change the import statement, it will. Oh, that's good. IDX. Oh, there we go. Forgot my little arrow. Okay, so now we actually have the index given to us. And so we can detect, we can say, we'll create a variable called even, which says, if IDX mod 2 equals 0, this means it's even. Oh, actually, we don't need an if statement. So, oh, wrong symbol. Okay, so if it's even, we'll do one thing, and then if it's not, we'll do another thing. And we'll get to how we're going to do this in a sec. So just to show you kind of like the differences, you can, let's say, actually, to make it more dramatic, let's do this. Yeah. Yeah. So in this case, every other item kind of does something different. And that's because we have this if statement and we're tracking it with even. One thing I do want to do is center all of these horizontally. And so we can do that with, actually, we don't need to, oh, we can, yeah. So it's horizontal, but it's not, let's see, arrangement dot center. This should move down. Oh, that didn't quite work. Anyway, I'll delete that for now. Okay, so go back to our spec. We want to do this 2 by 1. The easiest way to do this for this video, and there's probably a more efficient way to do it, but what I end up doing is changing how the items data is passed to the lazy row. So what I ended up doing is creating a different data structure that basically takes the original list and then chunks it into two by one items. Maybe not the best approach, but I actually think it works really well for this for trying to implement this at a basic level. So I have this function I've already written before. It's just called transform to weaved list. Takes items in and basically generates this list of like every other item in the list is either 2 or 1. And so then now what I can do is instead of just passing the list unaltered, I can transform it to a weaved list. And then I'll make that slight modification to the key. And so now what we can do is, so if it's even, and this is where we can actually start to build things. Actually, we'll make a column for all of this. Column, we'll say modifier dot fill max, and then vertical alignment. Oh, wait. We'll do that. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm assuming that whenever it's even, there's 2 items in the list, and whenever it's odd, there's only 1. Though, you could arrive at a list that doesn't exactly play out this way, and so what we do need to do is just make sure that we account for the fact that sometimes there's not always exactly two items in the even slot. So the way we do that is we just say if item 1 dot get, oh, actually, wait. So items dot get, or no, item dot get or null is not null, then we'll show both cards. Then if it is, we'll just show the first one. Okay, so now if we see, oh, I have to build and refresh this whole thing. Okay. All right. Actually, that doesn't look right at all. See items. Oh, wait, did we do this right? Yeah, did pass all of these. Okay. Actually, this doesn't look like it's working. Here's a way to test it. is working. It's weird. Uh, okay, so it's a column. Let me just check my work. Column. Okay. Weird. Let's see. No, that seems to be all working. Okay. Well, let's just... So, I will just get to that in a sec. So we're going to add a spacer, because if we go back to the spec, there's roughly, when you have two items, there's roughly 40 dp between the two. And then the width of these will be... So actually, the column itself is this width, because this is each item in the list. Yep. And then this actually doesn't... We don't need this right now. There we go. Okay, so yeah, this is looking a little better, but we're still not getting the two column layout here. Okay, so let's go back to my old code. Okay. One little, let's see, one. Yeah, and then we are going to add some padding. Horizontal 16. And then the horizontal alignment will be... Actually, we'll not do that yet. Okay, so in this column, let's see. Column. Okay, this all looks right. Okay, right. So we want each of these cards, they're not a specific size, so we want them to kind of like take up as much space as possible. At least on the at least first on the height, and then the width can change. And the width, it's a little hard to see, but it ends up being about 85% of this 66 of this 2/3 size. So within the 2/3 size, it's about 85%. So that's what we're going to do. For the modifier, I'm going to give it a weight of 1F, so it takes all the space. And the same here. This. But then the first one will align to, all right, the width will be a fraction. 0.85F, yeah. Yeah, so actually adding that weight one now shows the 2 by here. So yeah, so now if we look, it's like every other one there's 2, and then every odd one there's 1. And so like I said, we want to offset one of them to be more to the right and more to the left. So the first one should be aligned a little to the left, so we can say align, to the right end. And then this should move forward. Yep, there we go. Cool. So now we have this kind of arrangement. Actually, though, I think when I did this, right, so this is actually the second. This is the first item, and that's the second one. So I think it actually switches the bag. Yes, there we go. Okay. And then the middle one, or this odd one, should really actually be centered, so we don't want it to be the full height, and then this is this one. So we can say, um, oh wait, what did I ended up doing? It ends up being kind of arbitrary. Yeah. So, like I said, you can this weaved image list has a lot of flexibility in how you want to style things. In this case, I just randomly said, maybe it should be half the size of half the height and then 80% of the width. But we want to actually have it to be centered horizontally. And so that is where we use the column. So for the column, vertical arrangement equals arrangement dot center. Yep, and then it moves it here. But we also want this to be it's kind of a funny thing, but every other, and this is like a minute detail in the weaved list, it ends up being centered between the even ones. So here it's about 32, about 36. It's not perfect, but I'm just gonna say it's centered in this middle area. So the way we can do that actually is with horizontal alignment. Did I spell that correct? We can say if it's even, or no, sorry, if it's even, the alignment will just be start, but if it's odd, we can say it's horizontal. And this should, push it a little bit more. So if you were to stop interactive preview, you can, like I said, hover over and see these lines. And so you can see this card is kind of right in the middle in that second item in the list. And then like here, these are offset, right? Because in that first one, one is offset to the left, one is offset to the right. So it creates this unique, this neat arrangement called the weave list. So if we can start interactive preview. Yeah, so you can scroll. It's like it kind of has this consistent layout, but kind of weaves in and out. So it's fun. So let's see. So I think that actually, did we finish the list? Oh, yeah. One little other thing. So this shows up in different categories. Like I said, like sometimes the number of items in your catalog aren't always going to be perfect to the 2-1 arrangement, and so you might, so in this case, right, like so here it's 2, then it's 1, the next one only has 1, and so we have to account for, sometimes there aren't always going to be that. So in this case, and that's what I did here, said, if there is a second one, show 2 cards, and if there isn't, show 1. But we didn't change the layout of just showing 1. And so we can add this little bit of code for modifiers to tweak it. And so now, if we scroll to the end, so it looks, about the same as this one. We could always, you could change it if you wanted to not look like that. In fact, maybe, you could do something like this if you really wanted to. You can say, not modifier, but align to, the top. Oh, it doesn't like that. Is it? Oh, maybe this doesn't actually work. Yeah, actually the alignment is incorrect. But you can mess around with it to get the exact look and feel you want. But the other thing we will also do is at least at the end of the list, we'll add some content padding. The lazy row, I mean. So this is useful because it allows you to add padding to the overall list versus adding it to every item. And so, it just gives it a little more padding so that if the user scrolls to the end, then there's, some padding in there. I think a better example is if we were to go back to accessories, and we'll go to interactive preview. Yeah, so you can see there's a little more padding here. So if we actually reduce this to 0, there would be less padding at the end. And so sometimes you do want content padding depending on how the list is arranged. Okay. Let me just go back. Let's see. I think we've done everything here. Okay. So we actually have our catalog preview. But we actually want this on the home screen. So originally, right, in the design, this goes on this front layer in the backdrop. So we've built the catalog card, we've built the catalog itself, but now we want to put the catalog on the front layer. So now we're going to go back to the backdrop that we built before. If you remember, we had this placeholder content that just says this is the content for category all. So we'll go back down, and here is what we originally did before. So now we're actually going to replace this with the catalog. So catalog, same modifier, fill max size. And then for the items, we will do a similar thing, but we'll filter it by the active category. So, but one thing I will do is say, if the category, it can either be filter it, don't filter, or include it if it's in the all category, or if the category matches the active category. So by doing that, oh, did I get this logic wrong? Oh, right. This should be, Okay. Well, okay, this looks odd. So something is broken. Doesn't look right. Oh, okay. Some weird caching. So build and refresh, and so here we are actually. So this looks pretty close to what we did before. Yeah, there you go. So right now it's everything's being loaded, but now because that's the default we had for this preview. But if you open the backdrop, we had to all. So now if we filter it, we can say just show me home, and so home is just shown. We can go to clothing. Clothing is just shown, and then accessories. So this is all, because we're basically binding this list with a filter, and we had hooked up all this logic before, we just hadn't hooked it up to a list. But this is actually on the backdrop. So in the full context of the app with the cart bottom sheet, okay, so now it refreshes, you can see this is here. So yeah, this is the list, and then this is the items. So the one thing is like, well, how do we actually add this item to this list? So that's the second, or that's the last thing I think we can do today. Let me just check our agenda. Yep, so we created the custom card, we built the weave list. Now we're going to hook up the interaction to add the items to the card. All right. So in order to do that, we have to start all the way back at the card itself. So the user is going to tap. In this case, I'm just going to have the user tap the card. You can tweak it if you want to make it only tap this icon. That's not necessarily difficult to do. But for now, we'll just do this. So for the catalog card, we'll add an on add item event. And all we have to do now is in this column here is we just add a clickable modifier that says if you click this, then we will just call on add item and pass it the data of the card. Okay. And so then wherever these cards are being used, and so in this case they're being used in this list, we want the catalog to receive that same event. And so I think if you remember from our past lessons, we want to pass pass state down and pass events back up. And so we are at this point going to pass events back up. So the catalog needs an event to go back up. So we'll say on add item to cart. Same method signature item data. You can always default it to nothing. And so here, for every card that is tapped, we can say on add item, call the same method on add item to cart. I'll just copy paste that all here. Okay. So then for the catalog needs to pass that event up to the backdrop. So do that on. And then the backdrop needs to pass this all the way, because really what happens is at the very top of our app, we have the cart items managed. And so we have to kind of bubble those events all the way back to this point in the app so that then we can say, oh, the cart bottom sheet needs to add or remove things to the cart. So for the backdrop, we'll also add another item or another call to it. On add item to cart. We don't have to do this, but you can say from catalog just to make it clearer when you read your code. From the front layer, we can just call the same item. So now we're just kind of bubbling events all the way up. We'll go to drop. So here on that. So here, we're finally at the very top. We can just say, oh, okay. So now we can just say cart items dot add the item. And so it's the same data structure that's passed to cart bottom sheet. And so in theory, oh, wrong preview. Let's see if it actually picked up the changes. Probably not, because we did it across multiple files. So assuming we did everything correctly. So there's only 2 items in this list. And if I just tap that, boom, it adds it to the list. So now there's 3. So we can remove these because we added that functionality before. But, I can click this and I can click it multiple times. One thing that I did do already, we probably won't have time to get through it in this last lesson or last episode, unfortunately, is this animation. I can explain a little bit about it. So in the design itself, this is kind of how the cart starts when there's nothing in it. But over time, you add more items. But there is a design, I can't recall where it is actually. Oh, show left sidebar, please. Is it here? Oh yes, here we go. At some point, there is a maximum. So on the design itself or the spec, it says that, after 3 items, it becomes a digit. And so if you add multiple items to the cart, then that number just increments. And that's what I did. So, there are many, many items in this list, but as you remove them, it adds to here. And the animation, that's also kind of a side effect of when we did the cart bottom sheet animation. So basically it's always, or let me actually go to the cart bottom sheet. Oh yeah, so if you go to the cart bottom sheet, I actually have this kind of previewed for you, but this is I can show you I built the mechanism where I added like 11 items to it. Um, but in the calculation of the offset, which is changing how big this bottom sheet looks, or sorry, expanding bottom sheet, it is right here. Yeah. So the cart X offset, it just says, when it's expanded, it's 0, but else it's always basically changing the size of this based on how many items are in the list. But like I said, I cap it off at 3. And so if there's more than 3, then it just maxes at 3. And then that's why this doesn't get that much bigger. And it always just has this incremented number. Yeah. But, if we had more time, I'd probably want to fully explain like how to code all that up, but I won't have time today. So let's go back to our Shrine app. Stop interactive mode. Yeah, and so let's see. To review, we hooked up the catalog card or made the custom card. We hooked it up to this weaved list, and then we hooked up this catalog, which has the weaved list, to the backdrop front layer. And then we also added it so that when you tap on these things, it adds things to the cart. This should work here. Yep. And so, yeah, there's many things in this list, but yeah, everything is working. All right. Well, that concludes today's episode of what we decided to cover. This concludes kind of the whole stream, I would say. I think just some minor things like, the Shrine app was based on Material 2. Material 2 is kind of an older design system, as many of us know now. And this Shrine sample was made, quite some time ago. Kind of the whole intent of this was for me as a designer to try and demonstrate to other designers, like I think with Jetpack Compose, it's much easier to build your ideas in Android than it was before. I know other designers out in the world like to prototype with web technologies, like with React. I know some that even do Flutter, and there's actually a ton of designers I've seen that do prototyping with Swift and iOS and Swift UI. So I was thinking with Android, we have this opportunity, I think, with Jetpack Compose to have a much easier mechanism for designers to prototype on. And I hope that, these lessons and this code and explanations kind of help designers be inspired to build stuff for themselves. Because I think it's very easy or I shouldn't say very easy. It's relatively much easier than before. And I think people have a lot of fun. And especially if you've done development with web development or React or Swift UI, a lot of the concepts in Jetpack Compose will be very familiar. But going forward, this is the end of it. But I think if I had to reflect on some things I would add, I think there's some functionality that's missing. In the design spec, there's a detail screen, so I would have gotten to that. Actually, we can you can see it here. This is, this would have been pretty cool to finish off some of these custom chips and this like bottom sheet. I might finish it on the side and maybe publish it to GitHub, but I don't think I will actually put it on YouTube. But the other thing is, like I said, this is a Material 2 study, and Material 3 is now, it's been out on Android 12. The Compose Material Library is now in beta and hopefully will be in stable soon. And so with that, I think it would have been fun to update Shrine to Material 3, like both from a design point of view and from a development point of view, because now the Material 3 library, we could be using that. So, to review that, it's, if we go back to our dependencies in our project, right now we are using Material 2. There's no 2 clearly indicated there, but this is Material 2. There is Material 3 library out there, and so perhaps in the future I will update this app to use Material 3 and update this repo so that people can see how to do that. Yeah, so I think that's like one other thing I would add. But yeah, beyond that, I think that wraps up everything we've done with Shrine. And so I'm super happy about how things turned out, and I hope people will check it out and try it for themselves and maybe go through the entire lesson as well. So that concludes this mini series. We covered all the basics of building UI in Compose, from using material theming and components to adding state and interaction to your app, and lastly, adding some playful custom animations. Hopefully, now as a designer developer watching this, you'll have a better understanding of Jetpack Compose and feel confident to try and build apps yourself. Make sure to look in the description for the GitHub repo, which includes the completed code of every episode and links to learn more about Jetpack Compose and material design. If you found this video helpful, please let us know in the comments below, as we're looking forward to continuing these kinds of streams. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe.